One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Gary Pine. Gary is the athletics director at Azusa Pacific University. Greetings, Gary. Thanks for joining us.
Ty, it's great to be here.
Now, Gary, you've been in your role for 8 years, but in total, you've been in college athletics for almost 40 years now. So you're a veteran to college athletics with a lot of experience and knowledge in terms of what you do. You also serve on the NCAA D2 football committee. Now, for those of us that are from the West Coast, for those of us that understand football and understand Division II football on the West Coast, this is my perspective, and I hope you'll educate me. It seems like there's something happening out there. There are only, at the current moment, 3 schools on the West Coast of the United States that play Division II football. Am I wrong in saying that's problematic, or that's just the nature of where we are and we have to figure out how to move forward from there?
Well, Ty, it is a challenge. You're correct. When you look at Arizona, California, Nevada, Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, there's only 3 Division II schools. There's one in California, one in Oregon, and one in in Washington. Now, we do have one in British Columbia, which we're very proud to have a Division II school from Canada in our association. But there's just 4 of us out here on the West Coast, and recently, probably as 20 years ago, there were probably, I would say, 15 Division II schools approximately on the West Coast. So there is a challenge before us of how do we maintain football and keep it afloat when the numbers have dwindled over the past decade.
Of course, the schools don't move, right? They just decide that football is not a sport they want to offer. Or schools join, and of course, Azusa Pacific was NAIA and moved up to Division II, and that's kind of a question in its own. What attracted you to move up to Division II? I guess then you probably didn't see on the horizon that Division II football on the West Coast will be dwindling, but talk about that before we continue on.
Well, you don't ever make a big decision without there being multiple factors involved, and so this wasn't a single-prong decision to go Division II. There were multiple factors in it, but one of, I would say, the 5 factors was to give a home to football. When we were in the NAIA, to be honest, it's even more scarce in the NAIA on the West Coast for football at that time when we made the transition. And we were flying all over the country. In fact, I calculated at one time, I believe it was in 2009, we led the nation in miles traveled to put together an 11-game schedule. We played in Louisiana, in Missouri, in Florida, in Wisconsin, in Ohio, just to get an 11-game schedule together. So one of the reasons to go Division II was because there were more Division II schools playing football in the West, and we could stay west of the Rockies. But since that time, more schools have dropped football. So one of the things that we have to do within our conference, the Great Northwest Athletic Conference, is we have to play each other twice, which is not a foreign concept in the NFL. Teams within the same division play each other twice. But in college football, that is pretty untraditional and unusual, and that's something we've had to get used to. But we will play Central Washington home and away, Western Oregon home and away, Simon Fraser home and away. And when we had Humboldt State and Dixie State, we played them home and away as well. So we've had to be pretty creative to put together our schedule.
How does that affect playoffs, that kind of thing, I guess?
As a member of the National Committee, I'm privy to the selection process. And it doesn't, to be honest, help you to play the same team twice in a season. It actually hurts you. So in the GNAC, we have to win our non-conference games to help our strength of schedule, to help our record against opponents over 500, just to improve our numbers. And so we're a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of that. But fortunately, GNAC schools have made the playoffs 4 of the last 5 years. So the access is there. We just have to make sure we take care of business.
For lack of better terminology, right? Were there symptoms or are there problems now that you can see, being on the committee, being a national organization, seeing things broadly in terms of why football on the West Coast in Division II has dwindled?
Boy, that's a good question, Ty. When you think of the schools that did have football as recently as 20 years ago, Sonoma State, San Francisco State, Chico State, Cal State Northridge, Cal State Fullerton, Long Beach State, and a number of other schools, Pacific and St. Mary's, who have all dropped football in the last 20 years. In the battle for equity, and we need equity in athletics, in the battle for equity, I think administrators have made the easy decision to drop football instead of finding ways to properly fund it and keep it while maintaining equity and improving equity in sports. That seems to have been the path that many schools have chosen to follow in California, and I think the climate has allowed that to happen. But I would say this too, that I think a number of those schools miss football and what it brings to a campus environment. And I think it's one of the things we've been blessed with is what football does for a private school like Azusa Pacific in the Los Angeles area.
What does a school like a Northridge or some of these other schools that dropped football 15, 20 years ago, the rippling effects have probably rippled, right? But a school as recent as, I think Humboldt State is going through some things, as recent as that, what are some of the immediate effects of dropping football?
There is nothing, I don't believe there's anything that brings together a campus or community quite like football. And even Division II, where you're getting 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people to come together, and that's on average. Some Division II schools are getting 10,000 to 14,000 people to come to their games. When you can bring the community of students and residents onto your campus every other week, that is a huge relational piece for the community and for the school, and connections that create through that. Football has that magnitude or that ability to do that like no other sport. I think when you bring in 100 men of character, and that falls back on the head coach and who he recruits, and we're very fortunate at Azusa Pacific to have a Victor Santa Cruz who's got a pretty fine filter of who he recruits. But I know at Azusa Pacific, when you bring 110, 115, 120 men of character onto your campus of 5,000, and that's about the average size of a Division II school, those 100 men have a great impact on the leadership of the students on that campus. Now, it could be a negative impact, but it can also be a positive impact in terms of quality leadership, of moving the students in the right direction. I think men of character who play the game of football, who are naturally assertive, is a positive thing on a campus. I think it also creates diversity, particularly for private schools that tend to have a tuition that appeals to a certain social and economic class and limits others. Football and the scholarships that come with it allow these schools to be more diverse, and we all want that. I know at Azusa Pacific, to be honest with you, we're about 32% Caucasian, 31% African American, and 30% Hispanic. We're almost 30 across the board, and the rest is made up of Pacific Islanders or those with two or more races. But the diversity that football brings, the leadership that it brings, the morale and community engagement that it brings is unparalleled to any other sport that we have, I think, at our universities.
So from your perspective on the NCAA Division II football committee, you bring that voice obviously to the committee about, hey, this is what's happening out here. Everybody kind of concerns themselves with what's happening in their area or their region, but is there a national concern about that, what's happening on the West Coast in terms of, is this a precursor for something?
Yeah, there is a concern. I know when we called the NCAA back in about 2009, 2010, saying we're considering coming to the NCAA, there was a real excitement because we were a football playing institution. As far back as 10 years ago, I think the NCAA saw that numbers were dwindling on the West, and how can it remain viable? And so that was a real positive, and the NCAA was excited about it. And we do look at it, and we know that really when any school from the West makes the playoffs, chances are we're dealing with a flight, because there just aren't enough schools out there to have bus rides for playoffs, as you might have in the South or the East. And that gets a little bit of expensive, and that's something we're looking at. We would like there to be more schools out in the West playing football. We'd like for more West schools to come to the NCAA that are playing football, and there are more out there. But it's also caused us to be pretty creative. We've had to look at putting together some scheduling alliances, and I'm hopeful that here at the NCAA convention we're going to get a decision about an alliance that we're looking at in the Great Northwest Athletic Conference that will allow us to get 10 games pretty quickly and pretty easily without us having to scramble to find those 10 games and bring conferences together in the West that are looking for games that are hopefully cost efficient for us and create some rivalries and keep us all in the same region.
Is there a concern for the greater football community, right? Myself included. You know, everything starts in California, right? Is this a precursor for the game?
Well, I don't think so. You know, we're here talking at the NCAA convention, NCAA convention, and in 10 days, we're going to have a national holiday. It's called the Super Bowl. Now, 30 years ago, that wasn't a national holiday, so to speak. And obviously, I'm speaking a little bit here tongue-in-cheek, but the Super Bowl has become a very big thing. And we have shows, Friday Night Lights, and movies, Remember the Titans, and dedicated to football. Football is very much a part of the American fabric. I would say very much as soccer is part of Western Europe or even in Brazil. Football is linked hand in hand with American culture. And I don't see it going away because it's so much of the fabric of who we are. And yes, and I'll say this, and there's so much financially involved in this. Now, granted, the safety of the sport has come under scrutiny in the past decade. And there's a lot of reports out there about safety and insurance and future effects. The thing that excites me and makes me believe that football is going to survive and thrive is the fact that the NFL and the NCAA are doing a great deal of research, putting a lot of money behind improving the safety when it comes to helmets and wear of protection, when it comes to rules and enforcement of rules, when it comes to even the nature of the game. And when you look at football, what it was back in the early 1900s, when Teddy Roosevelt had to say, wait a second here, this is way too dangerous, people are dying. Football's come a long ways, and I think football will continue to develop and change as society calls it to. I don't think what's happening on the West Coast is a precursor of what's going to happen, particularly when you look at the South, the East, the Midwest. Football, Friday Night Lights, that is so much a part of who people are. But I do think those who are probably handed the leadership of football need to take a look at, okay, what do we need to do to keep it viable, to keep it part of the system of who we are as a country.
Keep it moving forward so it can benefit those who it benefits, myself included. Well, Gary, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Thank you very much, Ty. It's my pleasure.
That was Gary Pine. He's the athletics director at Azusa Pacific University. And, of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.